If you had the opportunity to live forever and never age, never get hurt, would you take it? That's the question Tuck Everlasting asks and answers. For Natalie Babbitt, the answer is no. The value of life comes with the growth and decaying nature of it. Hi, I will be your reading guide for today, and we are discussing Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. This was one of my favorite books as a kid after I read it in 5th grade, and I still have my old copy. It still has some of my old notes in it, some highlightings, so I'm going to be using that to kind of start to guide me on my journey because that's how my teacher guided me. So I'll be using this along with a lot of my old thoughts because as a kid I didn't like writing in books, and I still don't. So just a brief overview of what we'll be talking about in this video in case you want to skip over some parts. First, we'll be going over the plot and main points, then the characters and their archetypes, a couple themes, and then a few symbols. If you notice I'm looking down here, I have a notepad that has all of my notes on it so that I actually stay on topic and stay on track. And this is actually my first time making a video, so the lighting is changing consistently, and it's upsetting me, but it's happening. So enjoy. Tuck Everlasting is about a 10-year-old girl named Winnie Foster who encounters the Tuck family. The Tucks claim they drank from a spring in the wood that her family owns, and now they can never die. Stuck in the age they were when they drank the water. Ultimately, the story is about realizing the value of life together with death. Life without death isn't life at all. At least that's the argument that this book makes. That is the really cool thing about reading books is you get to disagree or agree with the points and conclusions that they come to, and it's more just like a conversation starter and a creative way to come up with things to talk about. Spoiler alert, from here on out, I'm definitely going to be talking about every little thing. So just to kind of hit on the major plot points in case you are forgetting something or you haven't read the book in a while, this is going to be going in order of everything that happens. So first, we have the man in the yellow suit visits the Foster's house and hears the music box coming from the Foster's woods. Winnie decides to run away, leading her into the woods. Winnie discovers Jessie drinking from the spring in her woods. May, Jessie, and Miles take Winnie from the wood. They see the man in the yellow suit on the road. The Tuck's horse is stolen. The man in the yellow suit manipulates the Fosters into selling the woods to him. May kills the man in the yellow suit to protect their secret. Winnie helps break May out of prison, and Winnie decides not to drink from the spring. Those are just some of the main points that happen throughout the entire book, just kind of scrunched down into a few. So the story takes place in 1880 in a rural country is another word for rural if you don't know what it means. A rural state that it doesn't specifically name. Some people believe that it takes place in New England. Some people say Ohio. Personally, I'm going to go with it's along the lines of the Oregon Trail, which means that neither of those states are out of the question. The reason I believe that it's on the Oregon Trail is because the Oregon Trail is whenever people were traveling from the east side of the United States to the west side of the United States, they would go along this trail that other people had taken before them with their wagons as they were, moving their entire lives to the west side of the U.S. It was basically unforaged territory through the woods. So it makes sense to me to say that they were traveling to the west in general whenever they came across the spring because they had not found a place to settle, and then they settled down somewhere in the west, and then they traveled back a little bit east and ended up somewhere else along the trail. Don't know specifically where. So the first couple of paragraphs in the first chapter really lead me to believe that it's along the Oregon Trail because it's just discussing how the wood came to be from a cow path to people following it to becoming a little town, Tree Gap. So back when I was in school, my teacher had us name some of the chapters. You can write them down. I'm going to put them on screen for you. It might be beneficial for you to write down some of the chapter names. just so you can easily flip through and figure out what the plot point of that chapter was, because that's basically all the chapter names were. So now let's talk about the characters and their archetypes. So if you don't know what an archetype is, it's basically just the stereotype or the type of character that a character is, like a main character or a side character, those kind of things, except archetypes are a little more advanced. So instead of saying the main character and the good guy, the bad guy, instead you're going to have the protagonist and the antagonist. The definition of a protagonist is the person that we follow throughout the story. So, if you are reading a story and the person you are following is technically the bad guy, they are still your protagonist. Because the protagonist does not necessarily mean they're the good guy. It's just the person you're following through the story. Which makes our protagonist in this story Winnie Foster. Her decisions are the one that drive the narrative. They drive the plot forward. Every decision Winnie makes is what drives the plot forward. It's what brings us to all of the situations that the book gets us in. It's all her decisions. She also faces a lot of obstacles, being whether or not she believes the Tucks, whether or not she wants to stay home forever, if she wants to try and take control of her life and run away, and in the end, deciding whether or not she wants to drink from the spring, which is ultimately like the biggest decision of all. The antagonist is the person in the story that is trying to stop the protagonist from achieving their goals. Typically, this would be the bad guy, but if the protagonist isn't the good guy, then the antagonist isn't the bad guy. Think Megamind. If you've ever seen that movie, we technically follow Megamind, and Megamind is a villain, technically speaking. And his antagonist, I can't remember the superhero's name, but his antagonist is the superhero from Megamind. In this story, our antagonist, the person that is trying to stop Winnie from achieving her goals of living her life and being free, is the man in the yellow suit. The man in the yellow suit tries to stop Winnie from growing up, basically. So the way I'm looking at this, in order to make him the antagonist by the typical definition of an antagonist, is Winnie's main goal in life is to be free, as we know from her talk about feeling like she's trapped and in a prison whenever she's fenced in her yard, and also she wants to grow up and have a life based on her decision from the end of the book of her not drinking from the spring. So if her goals are to be free in life and not have anybody constantly calling her name and telling her what to do, then working for the man in the yellow suit as like a circus animal, basically, drinking from the spring and then just doing demonstrations, is going to put her under his control, and she's never going to have that freedom. And if she wants to grow up, if she wants to find someone to marry and to have kids or whatever it is that she wants to do in her life in the future, if she wants to grow up at all, drinking from the spring is going to stop her, and the man in the yellow suit is trying to make her drink from the spring. He's also trying to hurt the Tucks, because he can't really hurt the Tucks, but she has found that she very much values her friendship and what she kind of considers family in the Tucks. And the man in the yellow suit is trying to put an end to the Tucks, basically. So the other most common types of archetypes are complex characters, dynamic characters, static characters, stock characters, flat characters, and minor characters. So let's start with none of those. The love interest. Obviously, this is Jessie. There's literally no other love interest in this story, which is a little weird. I'm not necessarily going to talk about that in this video, but I will probably bring it up in later videos. Winnie is 10. Jesse is 17 physically. He's technically 104 years old. 10 and 104 is weird, but that's not the point of this video. This video is study help. If you want to hear about that, you can watch a different one that I'll do later. He is obviously very fond of Winnie based on saying like, hey, you and me can get married in a couple years. And Winnie has a huge crush on him. She constantly talks about like there's a flutter in her stomach and, just saying that he's very beautiful. He is also considered a jester, or what is called a comic relief character. He brings a lot of the humor into it, and the bouncing around in trees and constantly trying to impress Winnie, making jokes and making light of the situation in general. And what I find really interesting about him is, depending on what you define as Winnie's goals as a character for her life, you could see Jessie as a semi-antagonist. So like I said before, an antagonist is trying to stop the protagonist from achieving their goals. Jessie wants her to drink from the spring. If Winnie wants to grow up, she can't drink from the spring. Jessie literally takes a vial of it, gives it to her, and says, drink this whenever you are 17 and we can run away together. But like I said before, what I think Winnie's goals are is to grow up and to ultimately be free. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but I don't view this immortality that they have as freedom. Jessie does, but none of the other Tucks think of it as freedom. They instead think of it as a burden or a curse or something that's just not good. Living forever to them is more of a prison than it is freedom, which Winnie is looking for freedom, so she doesn't want to drink from the spring. I have written in my notes that Winnie's goal in life is to discover who she is outside of her family and find a community of her own. But if she drinks the water, she will continue to be good girl Winnie Foster, doing as she's told and hiding from the world, but just with a different family. So she'll essentially kind of be doing the same thing because she's not allowed to stay in the same place. She's not allowed to build a community other than that one specific family. So if you look at it that way, you can kind of understand or kind of see Jessie as a sort of antagonist. He's not necessarily a bad guy, and he's not doing it for the wrong reasons. He's not trying to intentionally stop her from achieving her goals, but in a way he is. So now moving on to the characters that I did mention before that I was going to talk about. We're going to start with the complex character. The complex character is Angus Tuck. A complex character is basically a character that has more to them that meets the eye. It's not just like a flat character where it's just the characters, this one thing and this one thing only. They have a depth to them, a complexity. So Angus Tuck is our complex character here. He's very philosophical. There's more going on internally about him that we don't necessarily see, but we do kind of hear a little bit, in that he is honestly depressed in living forever. He's very upset, but he has a joy to him whenever he sees real living life come, life that is continuing on the cycle and growing. He genuinely feels happy with Winnie. He has a hardened protector exterior, but is deeply caring and passionate, despite all of his tiredness and sadness that is in him. His internal struggle is essentially having to live with something that he doesn't want, which is eternal life. There's just a lot going on in his head that we don't see, so he has a lot of dimension to him. Speaking of dimension, dynamic character. A dynamic character is one that switches within the story. They start one way and they end a different way. And I said that this is May for one specific reason. At the beginning, she's motherly. She's a very wouldn't hurt a fly type. She's very gentle. And by the end of it, she kills a man. I'd say that's quite a switch up. So it makes sense that May is the dynamic character, because she completely switches kind of her view. She realizes that she would do anything to keep this secret safe. And because especially at the beginning of the story, she is like, okay, we knew someone was going to find out, so we're going to bring them home to Tuck, and we're going to sit down, and we're going to have a chat, and we're going to say that this is why the secret should never get out. And then by the end, she's just like, I'm going to hit him in the head. And that's her arc. Then you have the static character. The static character is one who does not change, the opposite of a dynamic character. In my reading of the book, this is Miles. Miles kind of stays the same way all the way through. He's a very important part of the book, but that doesn't mean that he has a whole lot of depth to him. He has backstory, but the entire time he's very kind of stoic. He's very strong and mature all the way through the story. He doesn't really change all that much. And then you have the stock character. The stock character is one that is a stereotype. It's what's exactly expected from that character as soon as you hear about them, as soon as you look at them. Think Mean Girl or Goody Two Shoes. You hear those words and you know exactly what to picture because they're the exact same thing in every story. So that's what a stock character is. It's just something that could apply to any number of characters, and they basically only have one personality trait. In my reading, I said the stock character was the constable because he is what you would expect of an old law enforcement person. A lot of times in media, the police or the sheriffs, they're all kind of like, we're following the protagonist, and the protagonists are the ones that we want to see figure everything out. So a lot of times the people in authority they're a little bit dumb because they are incapable of figuring out what they should be learning and looking into, despite the fact that that's their job. And it's no different for this one. It describes him as fat. A lot of times you think of police officers as loving donuts. He is a little dumb. He's kind of grumpy, and he's very talkative. You can see in that one chapter that he's talking to the man in the yellow suit. He's very proud of his job, even though that he doesn't need to do a lot for it, and he's never had to do a lot. He says, like, oh, I should have brought a deputy, but I didn't think it'd be this bad for a kidnapping case. Obviously, it's bad. Get backup. So he just kind of makes some dumb decisions here and there, so it kind of leads me to believe that he's kind of a dumb character, and he's also just kind of whatever. And I feel like a lot of times that's how authority figures, specifically like sheriffs, stuff like that, tend to be portrayed in, specifically in kids' media. A lot of TV shows, I think, do that a lot. And then we have the flat character, the character that isn't developed. Like I said before, I mentioned it whenever, it's the opposite of a complex character. They're very flat. There's nothing really about them that matters. They're kind of important to the story, but they're just kind of there. Winnie's parents make the perfect flat characters because they're strict but caring, but you don't see that through any of their actions. You just kind of hear that from Winnie's perspective, like, I'm tired of my name because it's all worn out all the time. You know, kind of stuff like that, where you don't actually see or interact with her parents that much, but you know they're very strict and hard on her, but they really care about her, and that's literally all you know about them. And then I also said that the minor character is one that has lines and is very important to relaying information about the story, but they themselves are not super important to the story. And so for that reason, I said it's her grandmother. Her grandma tells the information of the fairies and hearing the music box in the woods before. So that's very important information to know, but her grandmother is not super important to the story itself, just in relaying that information, which we could have found out in any other way. So moving on to the themes, I will admit I'm not a huge fan of looking for themes. Themes are not my thing, so I'm going to leave these a little bit more open-ended so that you can come to your own conclusions about them, but I am going to bring them up and talk just a little bit. So the few themes that I have written down is immortality, life specifically, and death, and then the freedom of choice. The theme of immortality is very obvious, like it literally says on the front cover, what if you could live forever? That's obviously going to be a main theme of the story. If everyone is immortal, then no one ever grows, and everything will always stay exactly the same. And depending on how the immortality works, based on some of the lines in here, I'm thinking that it works this way, specifically based on the part where it says that May hasn't had to look in the mirror for years because she knows exactly what she looks like. That makes me think that in this, it's like a complete pause. So if you have a pimple, say, that pimple will stay there forever because you don't change. Nothing about you ever changes. If you had short hair and you wanted your hair to grow long, you couldn't because nothing ever changes. So I don't exactly know that this is the case, but I'm going to say that it is because May doesn't need to look in the mirror. Or if everybody stays immortal, then, like Tuck said about the pond, the population would be so much. But when I was in middle school, we had relatively thin hallways, and it was horrendous trying to walk to and from classes because in this hallway you could fit maybe 3 people in a row, maybe 4 depending on how skinny everyone was. And then you had lockers on both sides of the hallway. So if people are standing at their lockers, you can fit 1 person in between them, which meant that people are shuffling both directions. You have to take turns going between these people in their lockers. It is so packed. That's how the entire world would be. Imagine a traffic jam. You're stuck in traffic because there's just so many people on the road. Well, that's what the world would be like if there were so many people that were never going to die. The majority of the Tuck family views their immortality as a burden, as a curse. And it's something that they had no choice in at all. If they had thought about it before they drank from the spring, they may have come to a different conclusion. But Miles wanted so badly to be able to grow old with his wife and to watch his children grow up as he also grows older. But he wasn't able to do that because he was stuck in time. It was the same thing for May and Angus Tuck. They both also wanted to watch their children grow up, and they wanted to have the joy of growing old themselves as well. They were able to grow a little older than the boys were, but it's still a struggle for them because they wanted to be able to live their life to the fullest, and they can't because they're stuck in place. Jesse, though, views this as a blessing. He views it, instead of missing out on having community and having family with people, he looks at it as time. So now the theme of death, it kind of goes hand in hand with the immortality. But majority of the Tucks view the beauty of life being in that it can end. I don't have too much to say about specifically life and death because it is too much like immortality. But I like the theme of death and that it shows that it is more beautiful than living, because that's a time when you can remember and be happy about the past, and that some things are finally over and that some things are going to stick around forever. Death is a very interesting time whenever you get to experience it, but it can be a very beautiful thing. So the last theme that I have is freedom and choice. I briefly mentioned it before that I think a lot of what Winnie wants is freedom, and she doesn't feel that she has that whenever people have control over her life, specifically as a child. I know I definitely related to that when I was a kid. I wanted to grow up very quickly because I wanted to be able to have say over what I did. Like, I wasn't allowed to leave my house and go further than the stop sign down at the end of the street. Or I didn't have the ability to go over to my friend's house whenever I wanted to. That kind of freedom comes with growing up. To me, this book really focuses on Winnie's choices specifically. At the beginning, she feels like she doesn't have freedom because she's not allowed to make her own choices. Her family is always telling her when she's allowed to leave the house or how long she's allowed to stay outside. And so that's why she makes the decision to run away, because she feels that's the only way that she can have freedom. The only choice she has is the choice to leave what she feels is not freedom. And in the end, she has to choose whether or not to have the freedom from death, but then more restricted in what she's allowed to do, or have the freedom of living. So moving on to the symbols, I only have 2 symbols written down because they're the ones that I really saw. There's the pond, which is just really obvious because Tuck explains it very specifically in the book. It's basically the circle of life. It is, rain is like birth, it's bringing in new water, and then growing up is the rushing of the water down the stream, and then death would be emptying it into the ocean, and then starts all over again because the rain comes from the ocean and goes into the clouds and it comes back over and goes back into the pond, as birth. And it just kind of goes over and over again. It's the circle of life. And the wheel is mentioned multiple times. It's at the beginning, it becomes a motif as well as a symbol. A motif is a recurring image. It's like a symbol basically that appears multiple times. A symbol can appear only once, but a motif has to happen multiple times. In movies, you can have a sound that's a motif. The wheel is also the circle of life, except it's a literal circle. It's a wheel. And at the beginning of the book, it describes the summer as a Ferris wheel, the top of the livelong year. Like you're sitting at the top of a Ferris wheel. Is that what it says? Let's see if I got my quote right. The first week of August hangs at the very top of summer, the top of the livelong year, like the highest seat of a Ferris wheel when it pauses in its turning. So it's saying at the beginning of the story, time has stopped. The wheel has stopped because Winnie hasn't decided whether or not to continue the circle of life. And in the end, it says at the beginning of chapter 25, the first week of August was long over, and now, though autumn was still some weeks away, there was a feeling that the year had begun its downward arc, that the wheel was turning again. Slowly now, but soon to go faster, turning once more its changeless sweep of change. So, in the end, Winnie's decided to live. I think that's a little bit of foreshadowing there because it's before the epilogue happens and she hasn't officially made her decision yet. But I think it's a foreshadowing that she kind of has. She just hasn't really realized it because the wheel keeps turning and she is moving on with life. And it's going to be slow as she's a child, and then it's going to start to change pretty rapidly the older you get, because then you get into relationships and you get into children and get into growing older, and it seems to just go faster and faster the older you get. So I really like the wheel. It also, the hub is the center of the wheel, like Tree Gap is the center of this universe. Winnie's world is Tree Gap. It's the very center of it. There's a lot that you can do with the wheel as a symbol throughout this book, and that it's like the biggest symbol. And that's why I definitely wanted to bring up symbols in general, just because specifically the wheel is such a big part. If you want to read it again or listen to it again, just make note of every time a wheel is mentioned and try to figure out why it's mentioned, because it's always having to do with the circle of life, either putting pause on it or it continuing. And it's very interesting to look at. So that concludes my study help / analysis of Tuck Everlasting, the book. If you stuck around this long, thank you so much. This is actually the first time that I've made a video like this. I don't even have a camera. This is my laptop. So I'm sorry if the lighting has been changing and it's just like not the greatest camera. I understand. I'm working on it, but I just don't have it quite yet. I've only ever made videos like these for classes before. So this is very new to me, but I really appreciate you sticking around. I would also like to apologize if you listened to my reading of the book. I did voices and I regret it. They weren't bad, they weren't horrible, but I know that sometimes when people do voices it's awful, and I forgot that most of the characters were guys and my voice is just not that low. So, whoops. So thanks so much for sticking around. Hopefully I'll be doing another video soon about the differences between the book and the movie. So you'll get to hear a little bit more of my opinions on the story itself, and maybe see a little bit of the symbols and the themes in action, and then we'll see if any of the characterizations, like the archetypes, change in the movie. I am super excited because I only saw the movie once years ago. So I'm super excited to watch it again because I love the story so much. And I love comparing books and movies because I love them both in their own right. And movies can do some things that books can't, and books can do a lot of things that movies can't. So super excited for that. So thank you so much, and I will see you later.